All right, let's welcome Dr. Kevin Ker to the show today. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining me. How you doing, my friend?
Excellent, Fritz. Always good to listen to you and talk to you. I always learn something.
Well, likewise. That's why I'm having you on today. I'm hoping I'm going to be the one who's learning the most today. And before I have you introduce yourself and your background, I need to tell a story about the first time I met you, Kevin. And I was still an undergrad before I started grad school, and it was at Penn State. And Mark Chen, who was the viticulture extension specialist for Penn State at that time, invited you to give a talk. And Mark's been on the podcast too, previously as well. And so he invited you to give a talk. And what I remember about you, Kevin, was you showed up and you had this like Crocodile Dundee hat on, like a really cool hat. And you had like your field pants on, and you had like this vest, and you just looked like you belonged in a vineyard. You're like this, to me, you were like this Indiana Jones of the vineyard industry. And I was just realizing that I wanted to get into the vineyard industry and become a viticulturist. And so what I loved about you is you stood up in front of this crowd of Pennsylvania growers, new experience, and you just captured the audience, and you commanded their attention. You came in with knowledge, with authority, and also really great practical information. And it really just hit me. It struck me. And I thought, this guy is really doing something that I would love to just have a shot at doing someday. So, Kevin, I'm just going to give you a personal shout out. You've been a big influence to me in my viticulture career, which is hitting 25 years this year. And so I want to thank you for that. You've also done consulting. So tell the grower here a little bit about your story.
Yeah, my background is when I first started. A significant part of my work actually was in developing IPM programs for grapes. But I had a background in plant sciences, undergrad and graduate work as well. And so I kind of blended it into the process that you need to look at the commodity as a whole, not just as a little piece. And that's sometimes we get the silo effect if you're a specialist so much in one area. And I was more of a generalist. And from that, I spent 15 years as a specialist, and then I went into the consulting business. But at the same time, they started the honors degree program at Brock University for Viticulture and Oenology. And I was approached to teach some of the courses as well as help with some of the basic research at the very beginning, very small group of people. And what's most interesting about that is that it's now into its 27th year since it started. So I've been involved in an awful lot of far-ranging projects, between Asian lady beetle through developing the bud hardiness systems in the freezers, and looking at predicting bud survival, looking at varietal evaluations, whole bunch of stuff. So I've been lucky, and through that I've been able to travel the world as well, doing work in Australia, New Zealand, and in fact I went to China for 10 years in a row. And what was quite interesting, 4 years after I got started, suddenly Lafitte moved into China and decided to plant as well. This was for one fellow who wanted to start a vineyard. So I've seen a lot. And then last bit, I've been with going out to Nova Scotia to help them out with their industry after a severe freeze in 2022. And to add on to you, Fritz, I guess this is my 45th year.
What do we actually mean when we use the term cold climate vineyard? What types of temperatures are we talking about? What number of growing degree days? How do we define cold climate versus maybe cool climate or something similar?
Probably the differentiating thing, I think, Fritz, and people need to think about, is that growing grapes during the growing season is fairly common. The types of temperatures you might experience from bud break through till leaf drop are not radically different from a lot of areas. Yes, some may have more heat units that accumulate. I was looking up some things and trying to look at what would be Greg Jones out of Oregon and others that have talked about what is a cool climate and all the different models, and everybody talked about a lot of things. To me, growing grapes in a cold climate, the inference I would say with it is having to deal with winter injury. It's more the temperatures outside the growing season rather than during the growing season. And that's what differentiates the two. As you're well aware, through Virginia, I mean, you might hit temperatures into the teens in Fahrenheit or a little lower. For us in Ontario, we have winter temperatures that go -10 Fahrenheit or colder, and that fits in with a large number of areas. So what was odd was I look back, and you had asked a question before about growing degree days. And so I started to pull some information out on things. It's amazing. In Ontario, we have like 2,800 growing degree days using the Fahrenheit
It's a
scale.
lot. That's a good, you can ripen a lot of stuff if it'll live through the winter, right?
That's pretty good. Except that part of our dilemma is that often it's what I call, it's almost like the fireworks at night. Our temperatures climb really high and then they crash really quickly late in the season. And we don't get that nice moderating effect that Europe will get or other areas, because that allows us to maybe ripen some of the later season varieties because our temperatures just drop so quickly. So it's kind of a really interesting thing to look at. But I was shocked in, like I say, when I pulled it out and pulled out some of the literature, it's amazing to look at it. We have, depending on where we are, we also have like over 200 frost-free days. So again, we have the length of season there, but we can get a spring frost or a fall frost, and the vagaries of climate change are going to be all over the map. But there's regions within Ontario, there's regions in other parts of the world. I mean, I'll look at Quebec, Nova Scotia, Vermont, Maine, others. They're utilizing the materials that are produced in the breeding programs around the world now. The stuff that's been coming out of Minnesota, everybody's jumped on. The caveat with those is that what they're learning is that the really cold, hardy varieties, in other words, those that can withstand the most severe winter temperatures, also have a tendency to have the shortest dormancy period. In other words, when the weather
Early
gets
bud.
good in the spring, they could
Yeah.
break bud early.
What kind of things are you seeing in your world travel that really is unique to cold climate vineyard management?
One that would be, and it was a piece of advice given me by Dr. Stan Howell many, many years ago. And it was multiple trunks, but always of different ages.
Yes.
Right from the get-go, when you start training, don't have two trunks that are coming up that were growing from the same year. Get one that's maybe 3 or 4 years old and another one that might be 2 years old, or vice versa. At least get some time. His comment to me was the work done in Michigan, and I observed it here over my career, is under a severe weather event, rarely did I have both trunks injured to the same degree if they were of different ages.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part was renewal of the trunks on a routine basis in a cold climate.
So let's talk about, when growers are establishing a new vineyard in a cold climate region, the differences really should start with how you plan, how you lay out, how you plant your vineyards. So let's talk through how a cold climate vineyard should optimally be planned and planted. So we can talk maybe if there's things that a grower in a cold climate should consider with vineyard layout and design. In some areas where we don't get enough heat accumulation, you're trying to get a south facing slope. Well, maybe that causes early bud burst, and that's bad for a cold climate vineyard. Trellising, what kind of trellising, row spacing. Let's start with that. The layout, the trellis, vine spacing. What should growers consider if they're developing a cold climate vineyard versus maybe a warm climate vineyard?
Well, it's some of the core things you still have to do the same. I always tell people you really have to evaluate your site. You have to look at slope, aspect. You want to make sure that you've got the depth of your soil profile. What are what type? Do you have really rich ground or do you have poor ground? To be openly honest, if you have really rich ground and you're in a cold area, you're going to have more problems than if you have less fertile ground, because rich ground results in excessive vegetative growth regardless of where you are, because in season, the vine doesn't know the winter's going to be cold and it wants to grow too late and it doesn't acclimate well going into the fall.
Yeah.
Whereas on more regulated growth. So those are kind of the things of when people ask me, I always talk to them at the very beginning about, okay, where are you located? Do you know what is below your feet? And one big thing that I've run into, and I would say is probably even more critical than people imagine, is to look at water infiltration and what your soil moisture levels are like,